This may be a little late, but you do realize that most pictures for your segment about UP 3967 were actually of 3985 in disguise, right?
I couldn't find more good quality pictures of 3967, and I like some color in it too.
But the diesel and those auxiliary water tenders make it pretty obvious that the pictures weren't from the 50s.
Still, could be worse. Anyway, we have more locomotives to count down.
Oh, right. Oh, this video features pure American superpower locomotives. Let's do this.
But before we begin, what is a superpower locomotive? Superpower was a locomotive innovation by the Lima Locomotive Works in Lima, Ohio, in 1925, with the basic principle of enlarging the locomotive's firebox. This means a bigger and hotter fire can burn inside, boiling more water, creating more steam, and thus generate more power! Sorry, but yes, more power. But because the firebox got bigger, more steel went into its construction, so it obviously became heavier as well. This meant that the new locomotives needed 4 trailing wheels to support the extra weight. Entirely new types of locomotives evolved out of this technology. 282 Mikados became 284 Berkshires. 462 Pacifics were now 464 Hudsons. 482 Mountain types evolved into 484 Northerns. And 210-2 Santa Fe types grew up to 210-4 Texas types.
Pro skills. Pro skills. Anyways, let's get cracking with the countdown.
Number 6. Chesapeake and Ohio Greenbrier 614. This attractive 484 Northern locomotive was one of just 15 such locomotives made for the C&O, rolling off of the assembly line in October of 1948, even if its builder plate says June of that year. Regardless, even if most railroads that used 484s called them Northerns, the C&O didn't do that to their own 484s, because they were based in the southeast of the United States. So they called them Greenbriers, after the Greenbrier Hotel in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And how long did this beautiful machine last? 7 years, being retired in 1955, before a traffic increase led to the temporary return of this engine into service, as 611, not that one, since the C&O borrowed some additional 484s from the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, with one of those numbered 614. Before the year closed out, both the 611 and RF&P engines were retired, and 611 was sent to storage in the scrap lines near the diesel shops in Russell, Kentucky.
Fortunately, the 614 made it out of Russell, being moved to the B&O Railroad Museum for static display. However, 4 years later, her fortunes were to change when Ross Rowland acquired the locomotive in a trade for Reading T1 Northern number 2101, which was severely damaged in a 1979 roundhouse fire in Russell, Kentucky. Just 1 year after the trade was complete, the 614 was back under steam and ready to pull the Chessie Safety Express, a new rolling exhibit train designed to educate the public about grade crossing safety. When the system-wide tour ended in 1981, number 614 was placed in storage at Hagerstown, Maryland for 4 years until the next return to service came along. In late 1984, the Greenbrier was rebuilt and fitted with multiple sensors and scientific equipment for Ross Rowland's new project, the ACE 3000 steam locomotive. The ACE 3000 was the brainchild of Rowland's new company, American Coal Enterprises, and was based on the initiative to build a brand new coal-fired steam locomotive that would reduce dependence on foreign oil.
Throughout January of 1985, the 614T, with the T hinting at test engine, roared across the New River Gorge between Huntington and Hinton, West Virginia, with loaded and empty coal trains in tow. The locomotive produced great results and put on a magnificent performance in the freezing weather. But the ACE 3000 project got cancelled when the oil prices lowered, and the nation's railroads dropped their support. After spending more time in storage, the 614 was rebuilt again for excursions. This time, the locomotive was used on fall foliage excursion trains from Hoboken, New Jersey to Port Jervis, New York, and back in 1997 and 1998. During these runs, the locomotive was allowed to run loose, reaching 70 to 80 miles per hour. Sadly, the excursions didn't yield any results, so the locomotive was taken out of service again. Today, 614 is on display at the C&O Heritage Center in Clifton Forge, Virginia, painted in a dark green paint job for the Greenbrier Presidential Express. The chances are possible that we haven't seen the last of this famous locomotive quite yet. If only they'd keep her in C&O black. Speaking of C&O steam locomotives that went through cosmetic makeovers...
Number 5. Chesapeake and Ohio Canal number 2716. May I start with asking why this one got one spot higher than 614?
You'll find out.
Oh, okay. Anyways, besides 15484 Greenbriers, the C&O also had a fleet of 9284 Berkshires of similar appearance, which they called Canals after the Canal River, which paralleled its main line. The 2716 was used to pull fast freight and heavy coal trains along the namesake subdivision in West Virginia, even if they were designed as mixed traffic or dual service locomotives. When retired in 1956, the locomotive was donated to the Kentucky Railway Museum in New Haven, Kentucky, 3 years later. In 1979, the 2716 was leased by the Clinchfield Railroad to run for their steam excursion program. But sadly, those plans were canceled the following year when the Seaboard Airline bought out the railroad. Fortunately, the 2716 was purchased by the Southern Railway, no, not that one. That's it, and moved to the steam shops in Irondale, Alabama for restoration. 1 year later, the C&O Canal emerged in a new dress as Southern 2716. The engine wasn't just fully restored to operational condition, but also cosmetically turned into a hybrid design of what a Southern Railway Berkshire would have looked like if the Southern purchased one new. The tender was a marriage of freight and passenger liveries, and she got a centered headlight on the smokebox door with a brass eagle on top and a pretty standard rectangular number plate below.
When the 2716 began her excursion career for the Southern in the fall of 1981, she proved to be a powerful performer, handling passenger trains stretching 18 to 20 carriages in length, unassisted. But in 1982, Southern's new superstar was starting to struggle. The 2716 began to develop cracks in her firebox, which literally and figuratively dampened her performance. By that year's fall, the Kanawha got sidelined, and nickel plate road 765 was called in as a replacement. Following the merger between the Southern and the Norfolk and Western to form the Norfolk Southern Railroad, the 2716 was retired in favor of Norfolk and Western 611. Yes, that one. The story of 2716 doesn't come to a close there, though.
In the early 1990s, she was leased by the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society to be a running mate to the 765 mentioned earlier. The Fort Wayne crew solved the firebox issues and used the locomotive to pull a few excursions out of Logansport, Indiana in 1996. Unfortunately, the newfound stardom wasn't to last though, as it was discovered that 2716's boiler flues, which carry the smoke and the exhaust gases from the firebox through the boiler to heat the water, were close to expiring. At this point, the Fort Wayne crew had to make a momentous decision. They could either do a full rebuild on the 765 and basically get a new locomotive out of it, or install new flues in 2716 and keep her running for a while. In the end, the decision to rebuild the 765 was the best course of action for the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society. The 2716 was shipped home to the Kentucky Railway Museum, where she'd remain on static display.
But on the oh-so-appropriate date of the 7th of February, 2016, the Kentucky Steam Heritage Corporation, or KSHCO for short, announced that they picked up the lease from the KRM with the intention to rebuild 2716 for excursion service on nearby railroads. At the time of this production, minor disassembling and inspection has already taken place at the KRM, as well as the announcement of fitting roller bearings to the wheels on the tender. Estimates put the cost of the overhaul from $800,000 to $1.3 million American dollars. Kishko is very close to finding a suitable location to do most of the heavy rebuilding for 2716. But if all goes to plan, the most famous of the C&O Canalas will be back under steam within a few years.
Oh, so that's why 2716 got a higher spot than 614. And I have to say, the announcement of its restoration definitely took me by surprise.
Number 4. Nickel Plate Road, Berkshire, 759. Rounding off this part of my top 10 is one of 80 Berkshire locomotives from the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad, better known as the Nickel Plate Road, and happily one of 6 surviving locomotives of this class. The 759 was built by Lima in 1944 and enjoyed a career on the nickel plate for 15 years before being retired in 1959. In May of 1958, the engine gained an edge for preservation when she became the final nickel plate road steam locomotive to be rebuilt prior to dieselization. Said rebuild took place at the shops in Conneaut, Ohio. Please don't start swearing at me if I mispronounce that. With the 759 never being fired up in the time after the rebuild and before her retirement. And it paid off when the locomotive was bought by F. Nelson Blunt for display at his Steamtown, USA collection in North Wallop, New Hampshire. Then things got even better when Ross Rowland, still a New York commodity broker at the time, restored the 759 to running condition in 1968 for pulling his Golden Spike Centennial Limited, a special commemorative train celebrating the 100th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1969. To match it, she was painted in a surprisingly suiting blue and gold color scheme.
Wow, that paint scheme does look nice. But good looks weren't even the best part of the Golden Spike Limited tour. The best part was how far the 759 plunged into the western USA, as far as Omaha, Nebraska. Chances are good you won't see that happening anymore. After returning home from the Golden Spike Centennial Limited, the 759 was returned to her nickel plate road livery and ran 2 excursions for Steamtown, one of which would go to the museum's future home of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Following a few more excursions over the Boston and Maine and the Central Vermont railroads in late 1973, the 759 was stored for the winter on the Delaware and Hudson Railroad at their roundhouse in Rouse's Point, New York.
But, sorry for doing that again, but storing the 759 on the D&H came with a crippling problem. While the locomotive was in storage, the D&H didn't drain its boiler completely. This meant they accidentally left some water in it, which froze, causing a considerable amount of damage to the boiler tubes. As a result, Steamtown sued the D&H for the damage it caused to the locomotive, and won. As settlement for the damage, the Delaware and Hudson had some repairs made to the 759, and after some follow-up work back at Steamtown, 759 was test-fired in 1975. In 1977, some more repairs were made to get 759 legally operational, but after a boiler fluke failed during a hydrostatic test, it was decided that 759 would remain on static display. Restoration is pretty much out of the question now, with sister locomotive 765 having stolen the show. But, last time I swear, the 765 did pay a visit to Steamtown in the summer of 2016, with 759 sitting side by side. Come on, look at that.
Now, it might just be the steam enthusiast in me talking, but we need more Berkshires fired up, man. They were great engines.
On a side note, this announcement I'm going to make now is a request from my Facebook friend Tom Crouch. He's part of the Claude Hamilton Locomotive Group, a non-profit organization dedicated to build a full-scale replica of a London and Northeastern Claude Hamilton 440. Specifically, they've chosen locomotive 8783 as it pulled the Royal Train once. More information in the subtitles. I know, I'm lazy. Thank you, subtitles. Originally nameless, the replica of 8783 will be named Phoenix. So far though, there's sadly been very little in the way of physical construction for the locomotive. The only things made so far are the front buffer beam, the drag beam, and these headlight spires. or lamp brackets to the British. If you can donate to the project, please do, as this project truly deserves it, like all the other new-built steam projects in the UK.
If it's possible, I could donate too. Only if you do it.
One day. Hopefully. Next year if I can meet up with Tom in the summer. Maybe at Didcot. Even if he's an LNER man instead of GWR. If you're watching, sorry mate.